It was a blistering hot March day in 2011 on a deserted creek bank in Australia's far north Queensland, when young fisherman Todd lay trapped amongst the mangroves, staring into the eyes of a monster crocodile. 28-year-old Todd Bairstow grew up on the banks of Port Pirie, a small city on the Spencer Gulf in South Australia, about 200 kilometres north of the state's capital city, Adelaide. He was taught to fish before he was taught to ride a bike, and loved it. He had spent his childhood going fishing with his dad and brother, and even as he grew up, always took the opportunity to get out on the water when he could. And after graduating high school, he eventually got a job in the mining industry, which led him across the top end of Australia, working in different mines across the Kimberleys, Northern Territory and Cape York Peninsula. He had spent 8 years working in the mines, and being the keen fisherman he was, always spent his time off on the water, with a line in, waiting for a bite. But it was March in 2011 when Todd went for a fish that changed his life forever. He was working out of a mine in Weipa, a coastal town on the Cape York Peninsula, located in far north Queensland, when he heard that a few mates had been catching barramundi in nearby Trunding Creek, a small creek that flows through Weipa, that runs from fresh water and becomes salt water closer to where it meets the ocean. Todd couldn't wait to try and catch a barra for himself, and after finishing work that afternoon, got in his four-wheel drive with his fishing rod and 3-month-old puppy Dig and went off-road, down a rough dirt track, making his way down to the creek. Having found it, he pulled up, grabbed his fishing rod, a cold beer, and began walking down to the deserted creek bank with Dig in tow. But as he made his way through the mangroves towards the water, he got the eerie sense that he wasn't alone. He had often seen crocodiles in this part of Australia before, and knew it was likely they were in Trunding Creek as well, especially in the saltwater end of it, which is where he was headed. But as a local to the area, he knew to be careful, and had always kept an eye out for crocodiles when he'd gone fishing in the past. But this time, as he made his way along the bank with Dig, looking for a clear spot to fish on the water's edge, out in the creek, underneath the muddy water, a 3.5-metre monster crocodile lay watching him, waiting for its next meal. And as Todd made his way through the mangroves, it followed him silently, camouflaged underneath the thick muddy surface of the water, edging closer and closer, preparing to claim its prey. Unaware of the impending danger, Todd found a clearing on the water's edge. But the moment he stopped to cast his first line for the day, the crocodile burst through the muddy surface of the water, and before Todd even realised what was happening, it crunched down on his left leg with its lethal jaws. Todd fell backwards against the muddy bank, paralysed with shock. He looked up and stared into the crocodile's yellow eyes as it growled menacingly at him and began dragging him into the water. Panicked, Todd frantically felt around the muddy bank for something to hold on to, and when his hand made contact with a mangrove root, he quickly clung to it. But when he began trying to crawl out of the water, the crocodile instantly bit down on his left leg again, but this time it flicked its tail and went into its infamous death roll, and as it began to violently twist its body, Todd screamed out in agony as his knee turned in its socket. And when Dig came up to Todd, barking and growling at the crocodile, in desperation, Todd made a decision that he has since copped a lot of backlash for. But it was a life or death situation, and Todd didn't know what else to do. He grabbed Dig and threw him at the crocodile, hoping it would let go of him and take Dig instead, but it wasn't interested. It wanted Todd, and it was becoming more and more aggravated at Todd's resistance, and while Dig swam back to safety, it began growling at Todd again. It let go of his leg momentarily, and he quickly tried to push its head away, but the crocodile instantly bit down again, this time taking both of Todd's legs and his left hand between its razor-sharp teeth. Todd clung for his life to the mangrove root with his free hand, but knew with only one hand free his chances of survival were low. The crocodile had him up to his waist in the water, and if he let it take him any further, he'd be dead. He needed to get his other hand free. Adrenaline kicked in and he began yanking his left hand, trying desperately to free it from the predator's jaws. He gave it everything he had, and when he finally pulled it free, one of his fingers tore apart. He looked down at his mangled hand. The flesh and skin were torn off, but it was free. He quickly grabbed the mangrove root with both hands, but the crocodile began violently thrashing its head around again, trying to claim its prey. It rolled again, and this time Todd heard the gut-wrenching sound of both of his knees cracking as they twisted in their sockets. He continued to cling to the mangrove root, trying to hit the crocodile with his mangled hand, but it was no use. The crocodile was never going to let go, and Todd was tired. He'd been fighting the beast for nearly half an hour, and exhaustion had set in. And in a last attempt to save himself, he began screaming desperately for help, but no one came. He was all alone on the muddy bank, in the jaws of a 3.5 metre prehistoric predator that was about to eat him. There was no way out. It was over. The best he could hope for was that he would drown quickly before he felt any more pain. He let go of the mangrove and held his breath, surrendering himself to the beast. And as the crocodile pulled him underneath the surface of the water, twisting him around and around, his life flashed before his eyes. He'd never get married, never start a family, and never get to see his future children grow up. Then he thought of his parents, old and grey, with grief-stricken faces, from having outlived their son. But as he lay suspended underneath the water, holding his breath, he realised that he hadn't drowned. He reached out, and through the water he felt the bottom of the creek bed. The water was only 1 metre deep, and despite the crocodile continuing its powerful death roll, the water was too shallow for it to drown him. His will to live suddenly kicked back in. Maybe he did have a chance. Gasping for air, he frantically felt around and grabbed the mangrove root again. He pulled himself back up the bank and desperately screamed out for help at the top of his lungs over and over again. And as he did, a woman called Raylene Motton stepped outside to have a cigarette at the local pub about 150 metres away, and miraculously, she heard Todd. She raced up to a man called Kev Bevan, who had just pulled into the car park, frantically yelling that someone was being attacked by a crocodile. Kev took off. He sped down the dirt track towards the creek, trying to find Todd, while Raylene ran through the bush, yelling that help was coming. Todd felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he would live to tell this tale. Kev plunged through the mangroves towards him. Realising it was his friend, he yelled out to him. Relieved, Todd yelled back. Kev ran down to Todd and without a second thought, grabbed him, reefed him out of the water and dragged him 10 metres up the bank. Todd breathed a sigh of relief. He lay on the bank and broke down in tears, overwhelmed with the thought that he had survived, but it was fleeting. The crocodile had disappeared under the muddy surface of the water when Kevin pulled Todd out. But while Todd lay on the bank alone, out of nowhere it suddenly burst from the water again and ran up the bank straight towards Todd, one final attempt to claim its prey. But Kev and 3 other young men who had arrived to help threw rocks at it, and it eventually returned to the water, accepting defeat. An ambulance arrived and Todd was rushed to hospital. He was placed in the intensive care unit where he stayed for 5 months while doctors treated his deep bite wounds for infection. He lost his finger, and in total, they performed 17 surgeries to try to repair his shattered and dislocated legs. But doctors warned him that he may never walk again. But Todd was determined, and over time, through intensive physical therapy, he did learn to walk again. He chose to see the crocodile that nearly took his life that day one more time. He went to see it in a nearby zoo, where it had been relocated after the attack, and as he looked down at it through the fence of its enclosure, it growled at him menacingly once again, and Todd believes he saw a glimmer of recognition in its eyes. But he wasn't scared. He stated that given the opportunity, he wouldn't have put the crocodile down. I don't hate crocodiles. It's their environment. It's just one of those things. I was lucky to come out alive. He said he was glad to see the crocodile again and affectionately named him Kev. And although he will never forget his ordeal, he chooses to live his life to the fullest. He still goes fishing regularly, but chooses only to do so from a boat, and now has a deep respect for the formidable creatures he shares the water with. He later apologised to his dog Dig and thanked Kev for saving his life. He shouted him a beer down at the pub, where they still go to this day to catch up with the other locals, who never get tired of hearing about the day their mate Todd took on a 3.5 metre saltwater crocodile and lived to tell the tale.